Good afternoon, Arkansas. Welcome to All Hogs. I am Kent Smith, and joining me today on our podcast is Jacob Davis, our recruiting expert. Jacob, how you doing live from South Arkansas? What are things like today?
Man, it's hot. I'll tell you what, it's sticky outside, and man, but it's just a great time, man. We're leading up to football season. That's the best time of the year, and so when the weather gets hot, football's getting close.
Do we know football's getting close? Because, all summer long we've been writing about basketball. People have been asking us about basketball. We check the numbers on what's getting read. It's basketball. So is it really football season coming up, or is it just basketball season all year now with John Calipari?
It's obviously going to be basketball season all year long, Kent. But football is just going to get you there, at least for this year, just enough time, that 2 month window, to get you through till basketball season starts. So it's always going to be different now, as long as you have Calipari around, and that elevates your basketball program. But in the Calipari, I mean, I think it'll elevate the football program too. Just from eyeball perspective, just if Calipari maybe on the maybe in a booth or something, the odds are going to be on him like it is Taylor Swift in the NFL for the Chiefs. He's that big of a name.
At the very least, it ought to help if Pittman can make it through this season and he can, take his guys to some of those games. It should at least help. At least better than
Absolutely,
last year.
absolutely. And you think about it, people just he's a polarizing figure, and Arkansas's never had that big of a polarizing figure before. And so I mean, after you get after the people start talking about Petrino, the first week they'll be talking about Pittman, where's he at, and then the third topic is going to be Calipari. And then Calipari, I mean, people are going to talk about him. Those announcers, the sideline analysts, they're all going to try to get a piece of Calipari, so to speak. So it's going to be an enjoyable experience that'll probably at least get us through the first month of football season, and when basketball season starts to come at the end of October, early November, then you better fasten your seatbelts tight. This is going to be a wild season, I think, there on that side.
Well, if it's going to be that much of a focus, especially during football season, of course, the national media is going to try to get some interviews with him, possibly during the game, things like that. He's going to have to come up with some new stories. I mean, he's been here for, I don't know, a
Three
few
months.
months, and he's told the same stories, whether it be at the introductory press conference, whether it be on national media with, whether it's Jim Rome or whether he's talking to, some of the old ESPN guys and stuff like that. Same story over and over and over. And I can tell you, as someone whose job it is to literally stop down, doesn't matter what my children are doing, what my wife's doing, no matter what's going on, if he goes on somewhere and talks, I got to stop down and listen. And I've got to hear this same story over and over and over again. Is he ever gonna, you think he's gonna have some new material by the time we get to then?
I don't know, man. It's just like a grandfather or an old friend. They tell you the same exact story over and over and over again. They'll come up like my dad. He's almost 60 years old, but he tells me the same exact story. And I'm like, Dad, you told me this about 1,500 times. Let's get some new material going. But yeah, and that's the way I mean, John is 65, I believe. So he's reliving, I guess, the past 3 months. And I think it all comes down to what are the people asking,
Mhm.
whether it's Rome, whether it's Dan Patrick, whether it's whoever on ESPN, what are they focusing on so far as getting the story? And the stories out there, the stories are on YouTube, the stories are on the press conferences. It's it's time to maybe ask him some fresh questions, maybe some engaging questions, more so about the roster. I mean, if you dig deep a little bit and you go to the SEC spring meetings and Calipari was there, some of the questions that were asked of him in the hallways by some of the reporters that were there, and you can find those on YouTube. They're easy to find. But he's talked about some of the praising of Sam Pittman. I'm going to have a couple of stories about that in the coming weeks as we lead up to football season. But he does talk about the time he spent so far with Sam Pittman, whether it be limited or not. But he does have some encouraging things for Sam Pittman that he talks about there.
That will be interesting. I know Sam and Eric Musselman and Dave Van Horn made kind of a nice little trio, and they worked in Courtney Deifel and some of those other coaches. It was a pretty tight knit coaching group. I'm wondering, Sam is still, even though we're pretty far into this now, still learning how to be a head coach. They even talked about how that was one of the things was not having Barry Odom last year, kind of threw things off a bit. He needs another head coach there. Having John Calipari around, Calipari, my bad. Having John Calipari around, that can't be a bad thing. I mean, it's got to be a different dynamic than what Eric was. Uh, Eric was a lot of energy. Eric was good for learning how to use social media for recruiting and things like that, although that's not really Sam's thing. I think Calipari is a little more, Coach Pittman's speed and a little more kind of in his generational window to where he can relate better. And so I think he's going to get a little more if he can get time with him, Alec Calipari, than maybe he did Eric Musselman.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've got an opportunity here for his aura to kind of exude in a certain way in Fayetteville. This is the first time Arkansas's had a championship winning coach in its top three sports in a long time. Think about back in the 90s, they had Nolan Richardson and Danny Ford there. They were championship bred coaches. And so it kind of brings a different perspective. And I know that Calipari's championship was what, almost 10, over 10 years ago now.
Mm.
But it's different. He has the experience recruiting. He has the experience of winning big. He has the experience of winning championships. It's just different. And maybe that does help establish more of a winning culture and away from the all shucks kind of mentality. Maybe it's time that we put respect back in Arkansas football's name. And I think that your point, talking about head coaching wise, and we can bleed into Bobby Petrino because he did not have a head coach there last season on staff or a former head coach last season there on staff. How does Bobby blend in with Sam? Does he truly give? And that's one of the Petrino's big issues last year at Texas A&M is Petrino having full control of the offense, kind of like what Barry Odom had with the defense. Does Pittman allow it? I hope so. I think it would be a good idea for him to have that.
Um, I had a good point there just for a second. What was it? Oh
Hey, I
yeah.
went off the rails, so that's
No, no. I had a thought, and then just
yeah.
you switched over Petrino for a second, and I've started following Petrino. One thing that I thought about, one of the issues that Calipari had at Kentucky toward the end was Mark Stoops really wanting
Yes.
there to be also football, like we're also
Yes.
a football school, and he was doing a good job of building up. He's built them into respect, and it was starting to take away from the basketball side. Calipari talks about how refreshed he is. Well, he just walked into a full basketball situation. It is full support, 100% behind basketball. Basketball's getting all the money, all the attention is on basketball. I guess Pittman maybe almost fits a little better with that than Stoops did. Pittman wants to win. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think Pittman has the mentality of wanting to openly go after stealing the shine off the basketball team per se. He's not going to be out there talking about, well, we're not just a basketball school. Look at what we're doing. We need to get a chunk of this money and kind of starting to butt heads with Calipari.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that may be part of what's refreshing for him coming in is he's not in this, self-inflicted battle with football.
Right. He kind of has the mentality of let me get this fixed. Let me put away the struggles that we've had the last 16 games in this program, but I'm going to do it quietly.
Mm.
And I think that's a good thing for him, obviously, because he's not going to be in the limelight. He's not going to have this big spotlight of where football bleeds into basketball, and now it's just basketball 100% of the time, and football just kind of gets the attention until something, whether he's still the Razorback head coach next year or if he's not. We're gonna hopefully. I want to see him have success. I want to see him get this back on track. Sam is a great man. He's a great leader, a good recruiter. I'm not sure if we can say he's great, but he's a good recruiter. But I think that having less light, less of a spotlight on his program, maybe it gives him the opportunity to say, I'm gonna grind this out. Let's get this right. And when we do get it right, our light's gonna shine. And I think that may be I think, like 2021, 2020, nobody expected Arkansas to go 9-4 that year in 2021. Nobody even gave them a chance to win a single conference game when SEC went on a 10-game conference schedule that year. Nobody expected them to. I remember one guy on Athlon, and I know we're going to talk about the anonymous coaches stuff later. One of the anonymous coaches on Athlon that year said, "If this roster looks like the death penalty hit it," and he went to work when nobody expected him to, and he got it done. When basketball and Musselman, getting Moses Moody, the Jalen Williams, the Devo Davises, he was getting those guys, and they were making Elite Eight runs. Nobody was really caring about football at that time, and then he got his work done. Sam did, and they started winning ball games.
So, kind of when you're talking about Sam Pittman there, one of the things you mentioned, and it has kind of become his brand more or less, even though I don't think it's the brand we thought it was going to be at the beginning. This aw shucks, kind
Yeah,
of aw geez, hey fellas, kind of brand that he's developed, and maybe it works for him, maybe it doesn't. I think a lot of us when we heard Sam Pittman, O line coach, got all these offensive linemen behind him, wanting him to come. He's the coach you need to turn this around. And from the days where it was very, ground and pound, and we were going to bully you through and all that stuff. I think we all pictured a coach kind of like Campbell over with the Detroit Lions.
yeah,
That kind of he's going to come in, no nonsense, plain speak. Uh, we're going to go out there and we're going to bloody some people up, and we're going to work hard, and we're going to be, the one thing we're not going to be is, out toughed on the field and things like that. And I feel like that was something that the people of Arkansas could get behind. It reflected their kind of blue collar effort. Um, and it's not who Sam turned out to be. So I kind of wonder, does Sam need to drift a little more toward that? Need to become a little rougher around the edges? Uh, get a little more, you know, into people's backsides a little bit, maybe a little less of a player, like a player's coach, but in a much different way. Because there's no doubt
yeah.
Campbell, he's a player's coach. They are 100% behind him, but they know that there's not going to be any nonsense also.
He's created that expectation there at Detroit, where the expectation in the beginning was it was a player-led team. It was the Razorbacks when Sam took over. He had a lot of senior leadership, a lot of guys that had endured some of the worst football in the history of the school in the program. And you had players like Grant Morgan and Hayden Henry, Traylon Burks, and even bringing in Felipe Franks there for a year. These guys, they had that expectation for themselves that they were going to help rebuild this Razorback football program. And so I think as a motivator, Sam, obviously, I think Sam had a good way of motivating his players and helping his players motivate the rest of the team. And that elevated the performance of what the Razorbacks were doing that those first 2 years. And I think until that fumble at the goal line against A&M, that's when everything kind of unraveled. Nobody really came back and just tapped into that confidence that that team had. And, they were rattled there against Missouri State, but they were able to come back. What would have happened if they didn't lose confidence against A&M in 2022? I think as a player's coach, as a motivator, we've seen him in even last season where they would be down by 2 or 3 scores and come back and make it one possession games. he was still able to motivate his teams to kind of will back into the games at some points. But he's got to figure out a way of, hey, this is the standard here. I'm going to coach you through it, but I need y'all to help lead too. And I think that's what Sam and Coach Pittman needs to go back and do is start leading, but leaning on his players a little bit more too, saying, "Hey, this is your role. I want to motivate you. I want to will you to succeed, and have that expectation of culture wins." And I don't think the culture's been winning the last 16 games.
Well, I do think it's interesting that the players that are kind of leading the way, especially in the
Hmm.
offensive line for Dan Campbell, Frank Ragnow, Dan Skipper, kind of became a cult favorite there and got himself another contract.
Absolutely.
Um, those are the kind of guys that seem to be flourishing under
Right.
Campbell. They're the kind of guys that flourished when Pittman was here under his style, and they're his type of players.
Hmm.
So it says to me that if he makes that adjustment, it's going to be fine if he's bringing in his type of players.
Right.
Now, if he's bringing in a bunch of divas, it's not going to work.
Right.
He's going to need some old school, you know, spitting teeth out kind of guys, and that's at all positions.
Right.
A Clint Sterner type at quarterback, a Peyton Hillis type somewhere in the backfield. Some of those guys are, going to be rough and tumble kind of guys. I think you've got that in Luke Has.
Yep.
He seems to be that kind of guy. Um, there's a guy or two in the secondary that I feel like can be that kind of guy. Um,
I think you have that Utah transfer, Jaquindon Jackson.
mm,
His tape at Utah, I've watched, man, I've loved his running style. He looks like a guy that could Jackson Jaws up, man. I think he could be a guy to
and
watch out for in the backfield.
it's the old Rocky trainer Mickey. It's his old quote. We're gonna crap. What is it? Eat nails and have a
Listen, hey,
lightning
you're
coming
the
out the
Rocky guy,
backside or
obviously.
thunder or something like that. It sounds like a rough night after Taco Bell, but he gets the point
Oh
across.
boy.
So,
Oh man.
so
Too many of those burritos, huh?
yeah. So those kind of guys, I think, Pittman stacks up with those kind of guys, um, and those are not necessarily the break a bank kind of guys all the time.
Right.
Those are guys that have a chip on their shoulder,
Hmm.
and they come from places that are under recruited, so they're off the radar. They're the
Right.
kind of guys who are going out picking tomatoes during the summer and stuff like that instead of going to camps. So those are the kind of guys that you can bring in and find and develop into what a five-star would have been, and they've got that mentality that
Absolutely.
fits Pittman and what he needs to be able to build something up there.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, and if he can find those guys, just a few of them, I think you can kind of turn the corner away from the 4-8s and 3-7 seasons. I think you can get back on track.
You at least fix the culture,
Absolutely.
and that was the thing. You had Grant Morgan and Hayden Henry and all those guys. Those were guys who had to work like
Absolutely.
crazy to be able to get to where they were. Um,
Hmm.
and so you had a very different culture with that team. They weren't going to let it fail.